Good morning, I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 25th, 2025. Well, the United States is still largely buzzing with discussion about the incoming Trump administration. What's he going to do? What's the outlook for the United States? And while this is going on, not surprisingly, Trump is the leading topic of discussion in Davos, Switzerland, for the annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. And there you have European Union officials huddling with corporate elite to discuss how to deal with this new administration. Their Vice Chairman, Philip Hildebrand, in an interview 2 days ago, said that the problem facing Europe is that it's uncompetitive in the face of transformational forces shaping the economy and a fragmented geopolitical landscape. And Hildebrand warned that you can expect more uncertainty and volatility. The biggest concern, he said, is that inflation is not over. It is stubborn. He called it sticky stubborn, and will require, quote, permanent tightness, unquote. In other words, continued high interest rates to combat inflation. And of course, that's a monetary solution. That doesn't solve the problem. Cutting back credit, in fact, may worsen the situation by reducing the total value of the economy. And then he pointed to the political paralysis in Europe, especially France and Germany, which are the traditional drivers, he said, which are not driving at the moment. Ironically, the theme of this year's World Economic Forum is collaboration in the intelligent age. Well, not so intelligent is what appears to be the overall decision of the leaders meeting there, which is to stick with the green policy, the anti-science, anti-technology policy of green reduction of CO2 in the atmosphere and so on, and at the same time to continue NATO's war against Russia. Now, there was anger expressed by many leaders when one of Trump's first actions was to take the United States out of the Paris Climate Agreement, as he had done in 2017. And he did so because he declared it unscientific and unhelpful. The European Council President, Ursula von der Leyen, lashed out against Trump. She's been at the forefront of the move to what they call the Trump-proofing of Europe. And she said on the green policy, Europe will stay the course in the fight against global warming. And of course, ironically, she's saying this as a bitter cold front is gripping most of the United States. She said, quote, "The Paris Agreement continues to be the best hope for all of humanity," unquote. And she was backed up by the UN climate chief, Simon Steele, who said, "The world is undergoing an energy transition that is unstoppable." Now, this unstoppable transition, which is based on an anti-scientific jihad against CO2 and a transition to wind and solar energy, when you combine that with shutting down nuclear energy, with sanctions against Russian oil and gas and the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, this has had a devastating effect on Germany. And if Germany is one of the drivers, how can this policy help turn around Europe? Now, meanwhile, high electricity prices are part of the reason that Germany is undergoing a radical deindustrialization. When you add to that green regulations, which are stifling investment, you have a problem of many traditional German companies laying off workers and moving their facilities to China and the US. Steele added that the EU must guard against what he called crisis fatigue when it comes to climate. Well, there's a permanent crisis, and that's related to the war economy, and the discussion of crisis fatigue is designed to lower expectations. So with elections coming up, with key elections, the Europeans expect less from their government and are willing to make sacrifices, including sacrifices for the sake of war. And of course, that's the other aspect of the delusion of the discussion in Europe, is the intent to stick to the war against Russia. with Ukraine as the club they're wielding to weaken Russia. Yesterday, Davos hosted President Zelensky of Ukraine, whose pep talk to the delegates was merely a cover for another one of his panhandling extravaganzas. And of course, we should be used to this by now, because everywhere he goes, he's asking for more money for a war which cannot be won. Now, in arguing for a continuation of the war, Zelensky warned that Europe must be prepared to wage it without the U.S. Europe must be aware, he said, that it is, quote, not a top security priority for the United States under Trump, unquote. And then he taunted Trump. He asked, will Trump even notice Europe? Does he see NATO as necessary? And will he respect EU institutions? Well, the idea of NATO as necessary is a joke. NATO outlived its purpose, which was to defend Europe from the Soviet Union, when the Soviet Union voluntarily dissolved in 1991. As to the EU institutions, it's these institutions, not Putin, not Xi Jinping, but the EU unelected bureaucrats who are destroying the economy in Europe and creating this circumstance of desperation, which they now call crisis fatigue. Now then Zelensky pivoted to an attack on Putin and Russia. Who are Putin's allies, he asked. North Korea and Iran. And they're allied against whom? Against you, against all of us, Zelensky said, against Europe, against America. Now, oblivious to the economic crisis, which is being discussed at Davos, he called for increased spending on defense to pay for a united European security and defense policy. And the obvious point he was making is that the Europeans are going to have to face the armies of Russia alone. And therefore, Europe must spend more money on defense. This is not just about Ukraine, but it's about every country. And that's the line that's being pushed by NATO. That's what Biden was pushing. And that's why we're stuck in the situation where there seems to be no end to the permanent warfare. The other point which was not discussed at Davos, or has been discussed very little, is that the globalist paradigm dominant in the West is being rejected by much of the world, as leaders of the global South are looking to China and Russia as the allies for them in their attempt to overcome the underdevelopment that was imposed on them by the neo-colonial policies of the US, Britain, and Europe. There's a new strategic and development architecture emerging, and this will be the theme of today's live discussion between Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the leader of the Schiller Institute, and Colonel Larry Wilkerson, who was the former top aide to Secretary of State Colin Powell, and who's been outspoken in his discussions recently of the need to move to a new order. The topic of their discussion will be the American empire has gone badly astray. And what we're seeing is an attempt to change from an American empire, but it's not clear yet what President Trump will do, because some of the talk has been about expanding America, which sounds like an imperial project. So the question that will be posed to Colonel Wilkerson and Helga is what must be done to restore the tradition of the American Republic, as opposed to an American empire modeled on that of the British. There'll be a link in the description section to the discussion today. It's live at 5 p.m. in Europe, at 11 a.m. in the United States, Eastern Time, and it will be archived for those of you who can't make it live. Now also, I want to remind you, if you haven't done so, check out our dossier, The Liars Bureau, as we're fighting to make sure that Trump follows through with his pledge to take power out of the hands of the war hawks, the neoliberal globalists, and return to a traditional Republican policy, and I mean Republican as in republic, oriented toward collaboration with other sovereign republics instead of war. So that's my report for today. I'll see you again tomorrow.